Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm a journalist based out in Reykjavik, Iceland, where today it's a blue-skied, sunny, blustery day. Dare I say, it feels a little bit like spring. The snow has gone, the sun is high, and it feels like the darkest days of winter might be behind us. It's a fun time of the year for me because I have a house full of plants, and in the dark period of Icelandic winter, it gets a little dire. It gets a little dire for my beautiful houseplants, for all my beautiful monstera and peace lilies, and all of the other plants that I have dotted around the windowsills and shelves. When it's so dark, they really suffer. They start to look a little tired and look a little done. But then winter ends, spring comes, they start throwing out new leaves. It's time to plant some new seeds. I've planted some herbs and some flowers. I planted some edible flowers, and I'm starting to see the shoots come up. I planted some peas and beans and things like that, which I'll stick in the garden when it's finally warm enough for them. It's only 2 degrees today, but honestly it's quite nice. So the house is looking green, and it's kind of an action-packed time of the year. If you're into plants, you'll know what I mean. But it doesn't mean that there's no time for games, of course. I've played a whole bunch of stuff this week, and I'm going to run through some games that I've tried out and started, and then I'm going to talk about a game that came as a bit of a surprise. It was tacked onto the end of the recent Indie World Showcase for Switch, and it's a classic game, an older game that I've played maybe half an hour of on Steam, but it came to Switch. I took the plunge and bought it, and I've played through it in the last couple of days and had a great time, and that is Fez. I'm sure a lot of you will have played it already, but I think it's nice that it's come to Switch. It feels like a good home for this game, and it's going to get a whole new wave of support and appreciation from people that missed it the first time around. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. But in tune with the spring vibe, I dipped into Ring Fit Adventure for the first time this week. It's a game that I got for Christmas with grand plans of starting off the year on a good foot. And now that we're halfway through April and we're actually getting towards a quarter of the way through the year, I finally opened that box and took it out, strapped on that leg strap for one Joy-Con, clicked the other one into place on the Ring Fit ring, and played through the first 3 or 4 levels. I've been doing one every morning. It's a fun game. I mean, it's an unusual game in that the gameplay is that you have to jog on the spot to move your character forward. When you do so, your character will run through a kind of a low poly, fantastical world. You have to press the ring in when cued to do so, and you'll fire out little gusts of air that will knock into scenery and take out enemies. If you stretch the ring, you'll get a vacuum effect, so you can hoover up coins and collectibles. And then there are various kind of combat sections that you'll come into, a little bit like a strategy RPG. It flips into a separate scene, but instead of picking your magic or your attack, in Ring Fit Adventure you have to carry out poses. So you have to do like raise your ring up and squeeze it for an attack, or do like a sort of a squat and squeeze the ring to do a different attack. And it's really fun. I've been trying to get a bit more exercise in, and got the app Fitbit on my phone, trying to get 5,000 steps a day. I think the recommended is 10,000, but seeing as my average was 2 on days when I'm just in the house, getting up to 5,000 seems like a good start. I've also been supplementing the Ring Fit Adventure with a little bit of Pokemon Go, encouraging me to take longer routes when I'm out of the house, walk around a few side streets, catch a few Pokemon, and that's been fun as well. So I'm going to continue with Ring Fit. I've only done a few levels, but I'm going to try and do 1 level every morning, get a bit of exercise in, start the day off right. I also tried a game called Forgotten Fields that was sent to me by a PR. It's a graphic adventure with an isometric sort of top-down-ish perspective, in which you play a writer who is going through creative block, and you can go around your room and like poke away at your computer and read your mails and stuff. You can start to experience the life of this writer. You get a knock on the door and your friend has come over and told you that there's a family get-together that you have to go to. You venture out into the street and meet your neighbours. There's a little bit of puzzle solving to try and get your scooter going, things like that. But although it was a promising start to Forgotten Fields, it didn't run very well on my Mac. I don't have a PC for gaming, and so I play on a 2016 MacBook Pro, which is a pretty weak laptop, I'm going to be honest. The MacBook Pro from 2016 is dual-core, and it struggles a little. I've played some games on it successfully. I've played through The Witness, I've played through Disco Elysium, but Forgotten Fields was very, very creaky on the MacBook Pro. There was lots of dropped frames, and it struggled a little bit with loading screens and things like that. But I believe it's an indie game, so I'm going to maybe give it a rest and come back to it a little later, see if they've patched it up for Mac, or maybe even wait for it on console. But if you have a gaming PC and you're interested in a kind of introspective graphic adventure with a mellow vibe to it, Forgotten Fields could be interesting for you. I've also dipped back into Red Dead Redemption 2 on my PlayStation. I've been waiting for the right time to dive back into that game, that huge Western epic. Every time I start up the game, I'm kind of struck by the sheer quality of it. It's a really special game. And in the segment that I played just now, your character Arthur Morgan and Dutch van der Linde, who is the head of the Van der Linde gang, of which you will remember, a gang of outlaws who are always hustling for money, robbing trains and things like that, living this kind of high Western adventure life. They went to a sort of society party, and it was a really interesting section of game, very cinematic. We came up to the doors of a mansion, and the camera kind of sweeps in behind you as you walk through this large mansion house. And there are maids and service staff. There's the mayor of the town is there with a monocle and a top hat. And there was a string quartet playing in the garden, and lights everywhere, fireworks, and your task in this section of gameplay is just to wander through the party, talking to people and looking for leads and information. But the detail was just so stunning. I walked around this scene. It's probably a 10 or 20 minute scene. I think I spent 45 minutes or an hour on it, just taking in every detail, walking up to the bandstand and looking at the string quartet, looking at the body language of the people drinking and talking to each other. There was a part where a guy started choking on food, and I kind of caught him out of the corner of my eye and went over to him, and it turns out that you can interact with him, slap him on the back, get him back on his feet. He gives you a little business card. And all of this detail was just absolutely absorbing, honestly. I mean, I know it's not a controversial viewpoint to say that Red Dead Redemption 2 is a very special game, but honestly, there's nothing else quite like it, really. Every character, the animation of their body, you can tell who they are from their walks. You can tell who they are when you hear a voice coming out of the corner of one of your ears. You know that Hosea, your kind of mentor, or Dutch, is kind of in proximity to you. It's just so well made, so cinematic, so detailed. It really feels like an ensemble cast theatre performance that you're walking through. And not just in the gang, but in the wider world. There is an amazing amount of love and attention and talent that has been put into creating the people that inhabit that world that makes it feel more real than perhaps any other game world that I've been a part of. So maybe the time is coming to get into Red Dead 2 again. I also fired up Fire Emblem Three Houses for the first time, the Nintendo JRPG, which is split into two sections. There's like a strategic combat section where you kind of play turn-based combat, and then there is this kind of social simulator where you're walking around an academy, the Officers' Academy, where the young nobility of this high fantasy world are training to become the future leaders of their countries. And I've had medium fun with it to start off with. It's a little floaty. The movement is very floaty. Your character has a run animation that doesn't really feel like their feet are touching the ground. There's lots of invisible walls. You'll see all of these kind of tempting looking doorways and passageways and stairways. You can't run up and really explore. It's very much in contrast to Red Dead, where you really can examine pretty much everything in the world, and you really do feel free. Fire Emblem is very much a kind of a railsy JRPG experience, but I played a couple of hours of it. I did a few little tasks. I did a bit of fishing and talked to the gardener in the arboretum about growing some plants and met all of the various pupils. It seems like there's a lot of room there for it to be really fun. The academy is kind of like a Hogwarts meets old classic Oxford University style building with these kind of dreaming spires and a really interesting cast of tutors and pupils. It seems like it could be something that you could really get into, so I'm hoping that it will stick with me. I got it on sale when it was about half price, a very rare Nintendo sale, and so I'm looking forward to trying that as well. But before I move on to talking about Fez, I would like to say a thank you to my newest patron. I got a new patron notification. It always really cheers me up to see that in my email. So I have a new patron called Major Jennyral, the very model of a modern Major Jennyral, who joined at the €3 mid-price tier, the main quest patron tier, and she has signed up to receive the things that I create for my patrons, which are blog posts, sale recommendations on the Switch and the PS4, letting people know about what bargains are out there, particularly from the games that I've covered on the show. I have some extra episodes lined up. I've been a little lax on making them this year, but I have 3 different ideas now for different patron-only episodes that you could get to if you'd like to sign up and support the show. Very deep thank you to Major Jennyral and to all of my patrons. If you would like to join us on our Discord and to get those extra posts and episodes, you can do so from as little as $1 or euro a month. That's at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. I'd love to grow the community around the show more. It's a good boost for the show and for me. So thank you very much if you'd like to do that. Patreon.com/gaminginthewild. And with that out of the way, let's move on and talk about the featured game of this episode, Fez. So Fez is a 2012 game. It's a classic game. It's a game that caused a big stir when it was first revealed, went on to sell very, very well. It was initially an Xbox exclusive, but has travelled across most gaming platforms, most recently arriving last week on the Nintendo Switch. It's made by Patron under the direction of Phil Fish, the controversial developer, and he created the visual art, directed the game, and worked with a programmer called Renaud Bedard, who created a special level editor and game engine called Trixel, especially for Fez, that allows for the central 3D mechanic to function. The soundtrack is by Disaster Peace, one of my favourite game musicians, who also created the soundtrack for Hyper Light Drifter. You might recognise some of his signature digital, bit-crushed, dreamy style in the music that's playing now. And an early version of this game won an award for Best Visuals at the Independent Games Festival way back in 2008. And that generated a huge amount of hype and interest in the game. But the game would go on to have a protracted development period, and quite a public development period really. Such was the attention on the game. Indie games were like a new thing that was coming along at that time. With small teams and kind of developers who are both crunching and trying to represent the game online via their social media. And Phil Fish is a character who struggled a little bit with those dual roles. He struggled with critique, he struggled with people kind of attacking him online for the game taking too long, and for that whole kind of negative side of gaming social media that would later surface in various ways and still exists today. But despite all of that, the game came out in 2012 via the Xbox Live Arcade. It came to PC, Mac and PlayStation, and it had sold 1 million copies by the end of 2013. That included being in the Humble Bundle. It was ported to Switch by Blitworks and is available now on a launch sale. So I think it's $11, something like that. It was very well received by the gaming media. It has a score of 91 on the original Xbox release on Metacritic. And across all of the formats that it's been released on, it's never really below 85 to 90 out of, or 8 or 9 out of 10. Although it has been thoroughly review bombed online by users, and so the user scores are all about 6 or 7. But that's not really to do with the quality of the game. That's to do with the backlash against the developer. But a lot of people really love this game. It's one of the first games that my good friend Kieran, who is at FaceCuddle on Twitter, flagged up to me when I started playing and got my own Steam account a couple of years ago now. He said that Fez was one of the formative classic games that I should really try out. And so I did get it on my Mac and I played a little bit of it, but I was struggling a little with the getting a controller paired up with it, and I didn't like the key controls, so I just kind of left it alone for a while, but it's always been on my list to go back and play again. I was really happy to see it come to Switch, and I have to say, it is one of those games that just fits the Switch like a dream, very much like Hollow Knight or Ori and the Blind Forest or Ori and the Will of the Wisps. It's just a game that really feels like it belongs on the Switch. When you're holding it in your hand, looking at the pixel art, there's something kind of small and miniature about the graphics of this game, the pixel art style, that just seems to lend itself really well to the handheld format. So it sits very comfortably on the Switch. It was very easy to play, easy to fall in love with, and I actually got through it in, I think, 2 days. I finished it in 2 days. I played a couple of hours, morning and night, and I'd finished it within about 8 to 10 hours, something like that. I don't know if you Switch owners have noticed this, but for some reason the Switch only tells you how many hours you've played after like a nice long break for some reason. And so when you first start playing games, it doesn't have an hour clock on it, but I'm going to estimate it at 8 to 10 hours. So what is Fez? It's a platform game with pixel art graphics and a really cool central mechanic in which you're looking side on at a pixel art world, but if you tap the shoulder buttons, like LR or the right-hand shoulder button, then you spin the world on its axis by 90 degrees. So you can be looking at the front of a house, you hit the shoulder button, the whole scene turns, and then you're looking at the side of the house, and then you can turn the whole scene again and look at the back of the house where maybe there is a secret door, maybe there is some ivy trailing up the wall that's going to let you scale up to the top of the house. If there is a tower next to that house and you're looking at it from the front but it's too far to jump, you can spin the world and maybe that tower will then overlap the house and your character can jump across to it. So there are lots and lots of ingenious perspective puzzles in this game. You're spinning the world, you're trying to align different elements that are from one viewpoint very far apart, but from another viewpoint might align perfectly for you to move up. And so your character is kind of moving between different 3D spaces. The game is actually rendered in 3D, despite the fact that it's a side-on perspective. And it's just very, very engaging as a central mechanic and as a style for the game and as a conceit for the game. I hadn't really played anything like this before. It reminded me very slightly of a game that was nagging at the back of my mind, and I was trying to think, what game have I played that uses this kind of idea? And the game that finally came into my mind was a game called Nebulous. It's a very old game in which you play a little kind of egg character and you have to climb a tower which is constantly revolving as you move around it, a circular tower. But it didn't use perspective in the same way, but it's visually a little similar. But that mechanic means that you'll spend a lot of time jumping, climbing. The spaces are all very vertical. You can climb up, climb down. The character has a jump with some momentum to it, a little like Mario. So if you're jumping through the air and you're trying to land on a very small platform, you have to kind of adjust your momentum in midair. But your little white character who wears a fez, the fez of the title, which allows him to see this 2D world in 3D, it's a magic fez. He can also grab onto ledges, he can scale ledges, he can climb up and down, and he's quite mobile. Nothing like in the order of mobility that we see in Hollow Knight or Ori, but he feels satisfyingly maneuverable nevertheless. And this game does a really good job of innovating throughout. So you start in a village where the elder of the village teaches you about the nature of the world. It's a 2D village, and all of the denizens of your home village only see the world in 2D. They're almost superstitious about the concept of cubes rather than squares, and a little afraid of this kind of talk of this kind of witchcraft of 3D environments. But with your Fez, you are the only one that can see the world in this way, and you are tasked with saving this world because it's coming apart a little bit. Occasionally you'll see black squares appearing on the screen in a kind of a digital distortion way. It's a really cool graphical effect that is in contrast to the pixel art style, which is quite kind of hard and quite, crunchy, the way that pixel art is. But you'll get this kind of rolling screen moments with prismatic colours separating out, and you'll see a hole in the fabric of the universe with a starry sky behind it. And it seems that your world is coming apart, and that in order to fix it, you have to move through the many, many different sections of Fez, of this interesting, sprawling, labyrinthine game world. And you have to find cubes. You find little bits of cubes. Each one contains 9 bits. And then once you've got 9 bits, you have a cube. You'll see different doorways scattered throughout the world that are locked, but they'll have a symbol on them, perhaps 4 cubes, perhaps 8, 16, or 32 for the final door. And so as you're moving through this world, solving platforming puzzles, perspective puzzles, climbing as high as you can, finding secrets tucked away in rooms or on the backs of buildings, as you turn the world and try and experiment with the world. And you have to build up your cubes, move through these doors, and try and get to the final goal, which is you fixing the universe through some kind of mystical process that I won't spoil here. But I honestly found this game to be really delightful in many, many ways. I am a little surprised that it scored quite so highly. I think the game has a couple of glaring flaws that I will go into at the end of the podcast, but I did have a really good time with it. I think the central conceit is great. I think the audiovisual style is wonderful. The gameplay is very tight and satisfying most of the time. The puzzles are cool, and the whole thing has a very high aesthetic sheen to it that just feels very considered. You can tell that Phil Fisher's the director of the game, had a real vision for this game, and during that protracted 5-year development cycle, really went all the way with it, really went the extra mile. It innovates throughout. There are moments where you'll be using bouncing to get higher. There are moments where you have to use kind of screw switches to make platforms move up and down and arrange them. There are moments where you have to let water out to get lower. There are moments where you have to jump on invisible platforms that are revealed by lightning to get higher. And so all the way through the game there is something new to enjoy. It never got tired, and honestly I wish it was longer, having finished it now, which is high praise coming from me. I do love a good, concise, short game, but when a game has gameplay this good and is just such a whole package as Fez, it's the kind of game that you don't want to end. And I think that one of the reasons that Fez was so appealing is the decisions that were taken, both with the design of the environment and the aesthetic offering of it. The world is really fun. You start off on this kind of floating sky village, and as you move through all of the different areas of the game, you will find just lovingly created areas, like underneath a tree canopy, the forest canopy. You'll be platforming around there. There will be like an abandoned town with these kind of flickering neon signs, and you'll find temples that are crumbling, signs of an old civilization with all of their iconography and their constructions everywhere. And it really does stay fresh. There's a sort of a seaside area with a lighthouse. There's an interesting puzzle that you have to climb up through the lighthouse. And everywhere that you go in this world there is great sound, so it's all accompanied by rippling water and leaves blowing and all of these great sounds and little pixel animations that make this world feel really alive. The game is obviously a huge influence on Hyper Light Drifter, so if you've played that game, you really have to play Fez, because Hyperlight Drifter has a huge design debt to Fez. It's clearly very lovingly recreating some of the best aspects of Fez and combining it with some of the best aspects of top-down Zelda games and dungeon crawler combat games. So Hyperlight Drifter takes huge aesthetic cues from Fez. If you're a fan of that game, this is a must-play. And one of the more interesting aspects of the game as well is the way that the levels are woven together. It's kind of an open world game. There are many, many different areas that you come into, and they can vary from being as small as the inside of one room to being like an outside environment with several different exits, to being quite a large, sprawling area with quite a lot going on. And when you're first coming through the game, that feels great. You honestly feel like this game just doesn't end. Everywhere you go, there is something to see. Everywhere you go, there is something to do and something to discover. And a small secret door at the back of a dusty old classroom that you think is going to lead to like a broom cupboard can turn out to lead into a whole new realm of the game. And so on my first playthrough, I was just overwhelmed by the ambition of it and by the really fun forward momentum that the game provides you as you start to play. It really does feel like this world is deep and layer upon layer upon layer of interconnected spaces and interconnected realms. But this is where we start running into some of the flaws of Fez. The way that these areas are connected is difficult to understand. There is a map that you can use that was apparently a late addition in the design process. The director of the game didn't want a map, but it became apparent that this non-linear open world environment kind of demanded one. And the map that we have arrived at it's really bad, to be blunt. Yet again, it's playing with the kind of the rotating conceit of the game. So you can rotate this map around, look at it from different angles, and it almost looks like a cell diagram. There are different cells that are connected together. There are different areas that are kind of clustered on the map with all of the different scenes in a different sort of circle that you can see. So you can loosely see how the areas connect together. But in practice, it's quite badly executed. It's quite difficult to use. You can be aiming for an area and come to a space that has 6 different exits leading to completely different places. And if you look on the map, you can't really tell which door leads to which area. So you'll spend a fair bit of time just trying every door on an environment that you've been into already. And every time you enter a door, there's a kind of a cool effect where you zoom away from the area that you're in, and the area that you're heading to will emerge from the foggy background, and the game will kind of focus on that. It's kind of a really cool, dynamic level loading mechanic. But it takes about 5 seconds, and so if you've kind of come through a door heading for, say, the tree canopy, realise that you've accidentally gone into the sewer, then you have to go back through that door again, sit through the 5-second animation again, try the next door. Maybe you'll get it right, great. Maybe if you don't, you have to go through the same process again. And so the Metroidvania aspect of Fez is a little bit broken. And if you're exploring the map with purpose after that wonderful first period of exploration and discovery, you might find that the game is a little frustrating. You can't quite get where you want to go. There is a warp gate system to allow you to travel between nodes of different areas. But again, the presentation of it is bad. The warp gate is a 4-dimensional cube. Each side has a colour on it, say a dark green colour for the sort of sewer area, or a light blue colour for the temple area. But there is dynamic time in this game too. So game areas that have been signified by their predominant palette, their colour palette, sometimes it's nighttime when you come through them. And so there is a purple sky and stars in the sky, and the water is dark. And so that's the colour association that you will have from your last journey through that area. But then if you're trying to get there in a warp gate, it might be represented by a bright turquoise or an aquamarine or a deep green that you just didn't see when you were coming through that area. And so it's a little hard to piece it together in your mind exactly what colour represents what area and how to use the warp gates. I found them to be kind of like a game of roulette, trying to get to the right place. And that does mean that sort of in the late game, where it might be the kind of time where you decide to clean up the map, find all of the doors that you missed, and polish off a lot more cube puzzles, all of which are very enjoyable, you might find that actually getting to the unexplored areas is more hassle than it's worth. And I was still addicted to Fez after I'd finished it, and I wanted to come back to it and to polish off all of those areas and really squeeze the most out of the game. But it just became such a hassle getting around the map that I kind of tailed off. I was just doing difficult platforming sections that I'd done before once or twice already, and just feeling kind of lost and disorientated and just like I was repeating myself. So that's a big problem with the game. But I mean, to be fair to the director of the game, Phil Fish, he has put out statements about what he called the obtuse meta-puzzles of the game. He's described the map as perhaps one of the weakest elements of his game, which is a way of saying it's a bad map, I guess, if you actually are defending your game too. And he has described some of the collectibles as almost unfairly hard to get. So whilst it might seem like a flaw, it seems like these things were design choices to some degree. I do think the map is just a genuine mistake, especially if it came along at a late stage when they were crunching to get the game finished. Perhaps it didn't quite get that attention to detail that so many aspects of this game have clearly received, and they've been refined and worked on. The map does feel a little tagged on, but when it's such a central component of how you enjoy and move through the game, it's a bit of a flaw. So I mean, if I was reviewing this game, I think I would mark it down 1 or 2 points, because that really does put a dent in your enjoyment of the game. The other main bugbear that I have with the game is that there are numerical puzzles and alphabet puzzles in this game. So various places in the world you will see a mysterious language of hieroglyphs on cubes and written on walls, and you have to figure out the alphabet of the game. It's the kind of task where you're going to need a pen and paper. You're going to need to be very, very, very attentive to small details that look like background texture just added for colour that could turn out to be key in you solving some of the late game puzzles. And you can get through the game without that stuff. You only have to get 32 cubes to get to the final area, and you can do that without any of the alphabet stuff, without any of the numerical puzzle stuff. But the numerical puzzles and the alphabet puzzles are very, very present. Like there is an area with a giant church bell, and it has a symbol on each side of it. And it's a very in-your-face, tempting puzzle. But unless you've gone that extra mile with your pen and paper and your notepad and figured out the system, which is not easy, honestly. I mean, I ended up looking it up because I couldn't be bothered. It was a step too far. It's like you're playing a really relaxed, welcoming, beautiful platforming game with great logic puzzles and great movement. And it's a very forgiving game too. Like there are no fail states, there are no lives, player health will continues, there are no enemies, and so it's very welcoming. It's very welcoming in the graphic style and in the music. And so to sort of hit this wall where suddenly large parts of the game's lore and the background story and large parts of the way that you're supposed to communicate and learn about the game are walled off behind a process that's too hard for the regular player, let's say that. It's a certain kind of player that's going to get out a notebook and start turning the screen sideways and trying to sketch down alphabetic symbols, some of which there are sentences that are like 50 characters long, all over the game world. And so you're going to be using this key to decipher in-game text that's just really dull, honestly. So that to me too is a bit of a design miss. I do note that Hyperlight Drifter employed a similar in-game language system, but in Hyperlight Drifter it was drastically scaled down, and it was more of a single room in the very late game where you can decipher a poem if you've gone through that. Whereas in Fez, these things are littered throughout the game, and it honestly feels like you're only getting half the game without that. So that's a big negative for me, that too much of the game's story is sealed away from the regular player, and so the regular player is going to get half the experience. But if you are not that bothered about actually solving all of that stuff and getting all the trophies and stuff, which I guess Switch players don't get trophies anyway, perhaps it's not such a big deal for you. I do still say that in the kind of the 8 to 10 hours that it takes to complete the game, it's probably another 6 to 8 hours of extra gameplay with the pen and paper if you want it, and you will still have a satisfying time with the game. But it's just something to be aware of, that there are going to be times when you feel like a lot of the game is being concealed from you. So that's Fez. I had a really good time with this game. I'm really glad it came to Switch. It was a really fun couple of days of gameplay. It was a great world to get lost in. And it is a shame that Phil Fish decided to quit game development after many, many clashes with journalists and with the public, because he's clearly a super talented guy with a great eye for visual design and a good mind for game design too. I guess there are some players that will really enjoy those deeply buried lore aspects and Easter eggs and go all the way with it. So perhaps it's a taste thing. For me it's a miss, but for some people maybe that's the main thing that they will like about this game. That's Fez. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about Fez. I certainly had a lot of fun playing it. I think it's the kind of game that I could see myself replaying in the future. It's very charming. It was a really good time, a really lovely place to visit for a while. Before I end the show, I will read out a question. I tweeted out for questions for the last episode, and there was one that came in just a little bit too late for me to answer it. It's from @endoflevelboss, with a 0 in the boss on Twitter, and they say, do you see the Northern Lights frequently where you are in Iceland? I know it's a bit of a random question, but seeing them IRL and not just in games is a personal goal. So, End of Level Boss, yeah, we do actually. We see them quite a lot. There's a moment at the end of autumn and before winter really hits, when it's cold and dark and the skies are clear, and you can see a Northern Lights forecast on the Icelandic Weather Service when the sun flares are going to be hitting in the right place at the right latitude. And so we see them quite often. Here in the city, they're often like more of a green blur, but this year in particular, there were some very strong Northern Lights in Reykjavik. I saw white and pink and blue colours sometimes. You kind of see social media go crazy when they are out in force, and so there have been many nights when I've been in bed and I've put on some slippers and like something warm, stepped out onto my back porch, lit up a cigarette and just looked up at the sky, watched the Northern Lights and remember how lucky I am to live here. But the second period when they are visible is kind of March through till now, I think, when the weather has cleared up again, because the winter's just such a shit show that it's just storms and it's clouded over most of the time, and snowstorms, occasional clear nights. But these shoulder seasons are when the Northern Lights are really out. There are trips that you can take if you're in Reykjavik to drive out into the nearby wildlands or to the end of the city where there's just a kind of a piece of wild land and a lighthouse. It's a very beautiful spot called Grotan, and you can go out there and see the Northern Lights there. So it's perfectly possible to see them. I'd say from May through till September, it's too light outside, and so it's very rare to see them. But in those shoulder seasons on either side of the winter, yeah, you do see them quite regularly. I do post them on my social media when that happens. So if you're following me on social media, I'm at Gaming in the Wild on Twitter and on Instagram. That's where I would post any cool Northern Lights pictures if they come up. I'm also on Twitch and YouTube as Gaming in the Wild, and Facebook. I haven't streamed for a while, but I've been kind of getting the itch to do it again, so maybe I will soon. I would love to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear from people who have played Fez in the past, people who have bought Fez on Switch this time around, having never played it before. I'd love to hear from veteran lovers of the game and hear what you have to say about the complexity of the in-game lore and language and the map, how far you went down that rabbit hole yourself, if you think it's a big deal. So please do come and say hello on social media. Twitter is my main place. I'd love to hear from you there. There is also a Discord community for Gaming in the Wild. That's a perk for my Patreon supporters. So if you want to join up at patreon.com/gaminginthewild, you're welcome to join us, talk games, talk recommendations. We're currently sharing our favourite game music on the Discord, and we're talking a lot about Game Pass and Apple Arcade and PS Now. There's people playing on all different platforms on the Discord server, and so we're having a good chat about which service is best and that kind of thing. So you're welcome to come and join us. That's patreon.com/gaminginthewild. I'll be back next week with a new episode. Maybe I'll be playing some more Fire Emblem. Maybe I will have got into something completely different. But I'll be back this time next week. I've been John. This has been Gaming in the Wild. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye-bye for now.